Okay. Hello, hi. This is Gregory Muna, aka Master Moo, with a new episode of Art is the Church of God the Creator. And that's the title that we're going with. And it's perhaps a slightly provocative title. It's meant to be provocative in the sense of thought-provoking, but not in the sense of offensive. But it is what I sincerely believe, and I hope you sincerely believe it well. And I'm trying to convince those of you who are sort of on the fence that, in fact, that this is, actually a valid way of framing our feelings about art, not just as entertainment, not simply as a commodity, but as an essential human activity. And this began as an exploration of my personal creative process, and we were looking at the genesis of my electroacoustic music compositions, which you see an example there on the screen of a oscilloscope representation of a composition for sinusoidal wave combinations, which is also meant as a background texture for group performance in terms of reproduction of the rhythmic and the pitch values. But we're using that in the background now as a kind of a background texture. And we've expanded the conversation from just strictly music, because the original topic was music as a revelation of God and sound, to the general topic of art in general. So the idea being that our sensory perceptions are inherently valuable. And so in theological language, by saying something is inherently valuable, in the theological terms, we would say that's sacred. And so the first question is, why use theological language at all? I mean, this really doesn't have anything to do with canonical belief or belief in a specific religion. So why use theological language? And the value of theological language is simply it's the emphatic register. By using theological language, you're making a statement of principle. You're saying, this is my bedrock principle. This is what I believe. This is what I believe is supremely important. And this is what I feel you should take as supremely important as well. So it's taking it out of the sort of casual chit-chat, saying, well, okay, that's what you think, that's what I think. This is definitely sort of shouting it from the mountaintop. And why? Why do we need to shout this from the mountaintop? That's because in our contemporary society, art has been so degraded and has been so thoroughly commodified and reduced to the level of something disposable and valueless and just another thing, that it needs to be restored to the dignity which it has had in other societies and other times. So we're looking at historical precedents. We're looking at both in traditional Asian culture, the ideas of Dharma art, and we're looking at in Western culture, we're looking at sacred art, and we're looking since the 19th century with the idea of art religion, or so-called Kunstreligion, right? That would be the German term for that. And what I specifically wanted to do in this episode was to focus on the specific work of Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower. Okay, get that in the screen. There it is. Which is a 1993 speculative fiction novel. Octavia Butler, her dates are 1947 to 2006. She was a science fiction writer and a speculative fiction writer. And Parable of the Sower is not science fiction in the traditional sense. It does not have any sort of, it's not about technology, and it is doesn't involve any, space aliens or anything like that. It takes place in a completely recognizable version of reality. And what's particularly powerful about it is that the novel was written in 1993, but the action of the novel takes place now, begins in 2024 and goes through 2025, 2026. And it's seen through the eyes of a young protagonist who is 15 years old in 2024, so born 2009. Yeah, so someone who would now be 16 years old. And in some sense, it's the portrait of the artist as a young woman, put into a near future. Octavia Butler died in 2006, so she didn't live to see sort of the present day timeline of this novel, but we are living in it right now. And my students at my college have been reading it, and I've been reading it with them, and it's been a very, very rich text. And I wanted to share it, and specifically what I wanted to share about it was in relation to last week's observance of International Workers' Day, May 1st. And I don't need to talk about that. Everyone knows that May 1st is International Workers' Day, sometimes called May Day. And it's not an official holiday in the United States, but it is an official holiday, and it is observed throughout Europe and the Americas and throughout the whole world, pretty much the whole non-American world. Yeah. And what I was, because the central concern of Parable of the Sower is work and the transformative nature of labor, but it's considered in religious terms. It's based upon the passage from the Bible known as Parable of the Sower. And in different versions of the Bible, sometimes it's called Parable of the Soils. It's one of the parables of Jesus, and it's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and it's a story of a farmer who sows seeds indiscriminately. Some seeds fall on the path with no soil, some on rocky ground with little soil, some on soil which contains thorns, some on good soil. In the first case, the seed is taken away. In the second and third soils, the seed fails to produce a crop, but then when it falls on good soil, it grows and yields 30, 60, or 100-fold. And so in the Gospels, Jesus tells this story, tells this parable, which of course is a theological allegory, and then later meets with his disciples, meets with his students to talk about the significance of this. And so he gives an interpretation. The sort of standard text here taken from Mark, it says, listen, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and birds came and devoured it. Other seed fell on the rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. And other seeds fell into good soil and produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And he said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's from the ESV, the English Standard Version of Mark, chapter 4, verses 3 through 9. And then very interestingly, then there's a sort of an extra diegetical passage then in the Bible where then Jesus talks about it, interprets it, and talks about the significance of literary interpretation altogether. Immediately after that, that was verses 3 through 9. In verses 10 through 20, the explanation, it says, when he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked about the parables. And he, Jesus, said to them, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything is in parable, so that they may indeed see, but not perceive, that they may indeed hear, but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. He said to them, do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word, and the ones along the path where the word is sown, when they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. And these are the ones sown on rocky ground, the ones who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy. And they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while. Then, when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are the ones sown among thorns. They are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. But those that were sown on the good soil are the ones who hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And in the context of this, and again, I'm not talking about canonical belief or religion. What's interesting here is the use of a poetic allegory, the interpretation of the poetic allegory, and then the context of the value of literary interpretation. It's the in the gospel narrative, Jesus says that he teaches in parables because many are opposed to his direct teachings, and that he must use metaphor, imagery, symbolism, and so on. And he quotes Isaiah, and who preached Israel knowing that the message would go unheeded and not understood, right? And so he cites historical precedents, and so this parable seems to be essential for understanding all the rest of Jesus' parables. It makes clear what is necessary to understand is that Jesus, the gospel figure, will not enlighten those who refuse to believe. So, and again, I'm not preaching Christianity here. What I'm looking at is the nexus between art and religion. What's extremely fascinating in the biblical parable of the sower is the idea that it is essential to engage with art interpretively, and to not have a literal approach, not to have a literalist word, but have an interpretive approach. And what the gospel figure of Jesus is saying is that actually what's necessary is not literal belief, but that rather a willingness to engage in an ongoing level of poetic interpretation, and that the seed is the word, right? And that one must engage with the words in an ongoing process of interpretation. That's the sowing, that's getting into the good soil in order for it to bear fruit. It says, again, metaphorically, 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. And this parable has been represented throughout history in art. For example, there's a great painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder, The Parable of the Sower from 1557. You can look that up online. And, it's a common representation in church art. And it's very evocative for literature because it's sort of a key parable, and it's all about the idea of the significance of the interpretation of words, and that if we have diligence and persistence and faith in that sense, as opposed to literalist belief, it's sort of drawing a distinction between what we are conventionally told is belief, which is what Nietzsche would call slave morality, just sort of like blind acceptance, right? And this is not blind acceptance, but this is actually active, intersubjective interpretation, and where you are sort of willing to sort of drop your own preconceptions and to use reason and use your own experience and use your aesthetic sense to arrive at a personal interpretation. And I really think this is the sense that Octavia Butler is using it in her literature. And I think she's making an explicit parallel between her labor, her work as a writer, and the work of social transformation, which is the primary task of the protagonist. And the protagonist of the novel Parable of the Sower, which is Lauren Olamina, which is the young woman who is hyper empathetic and able to experience the pain of others, who has a unique skill in that sense. And what does all of this have to do with International Workers' Day? Well, it occurred to me that I live in a country where we do not celebrate Workers' Day. And I wish we did. And I remember asking my teachers, why don't we? And they said, oh, come on, that's a holiday in other countries. It's not important to us. And we have Labor Day and so on. And that always seemed like gaslighting to me. I never quite could buy that. And, over my lifetime, it's become clear to me that as working people, we internalize this attitude of negativity and self-denigration and lack of self-esteem when it comes to work in general and our own work in particular. That as working people, we're trained to view our work as we view ourselves as disposable cogs in a social machine and view work as this unpleasant thing that we have to do just to pay the rent and as a survival thing. And so we have only negative associations with work. And this novel, The Parable of the Sower, is all about hard work, but which is supremely meaningful, which leads to the survival of an endangered group of people, of humanity altogether. And Octavia Butler, she's not a religious writer, but she uses religious imagery and religious language to say that work is sacred, that work is positive and transformative. And she uses the theological language in that emphatic register, the same emphatic register that I use to talk about art. So I would like us to have a sacred attitude about work, that like Lauren Olamina, the protagonist of this novel, that we view our work as a unique calling that each of us has, to say that each person, each human being has a unique set of skills and gifts which can only be brought to fruition through labor, through work. And that is the willingness to do that every day, to develop skill, to develop technique, to practice the specific techniques which are necessary to bring our individual set of skills and gifts to fruition. That this is faith, because we do it in the face of non-confirmation, just as I am right now. We sort of put that out there. We're sowing seeds, right? And we're just doing this consistently, and this requires dedication, it requires diligence, it requires technique, dependent upon specific, each sets of skills and gifts requires its own technique. They're starting with the original podcast where I was talking about music. Musicians have basic sets of skills that they must cultivate. For example, performing musicians must practice their scales. For example, every day must spend a certain amount of time making sure that their pitch perceptions are even, and performing musicians also have got to do rhythmic practice every day to make sure that they're able to reproduce rhythms exactly and accurately, and without distortion. So, rhythmic practice, pitch practice, scales, chords, all of that. And composers, I'm a composer, have got to not only do that, but have got to do additional mental work every day. Composers have got to come up with counter melodies. So counterpoint, taking a melody and then creating another melody that works against it, that has its own sort of melodic and rhythmic profile. That's an essential skill. So as a composer, I practice counterpoint every day. I practice rhythmic counterpoint, working with timbral stratifications. These are just techniques, these techniques that I work with are specific to my personal sets of skills and gifts, which are specific to me, just as you have a set of skills and gifts which are specific to you. So developing a sacred attitude towards that is developing what we would call a gnosis, a sense of self-knowledge, of identifying what your own unique set of skills and gifts are, right? And then developing a sense of your sets and skills, your unique excellence, potential excellence is with the Greek word be arete, and then through gnosis, the sense of like actually following that voice of self-knowledge, then persistence, faith, diligence of development, and that would be technique. So for an artist, there's grace, and the Greek word for that would be arete, excellence, right? And that is the unique qualities that person has. Each artist is different. Each musician is different. For example, certain musicians are more skilled with melody. Other musicians are more skilled with rhythm. Other musicians are more skilled with counterpoint or with like orchestration or like timbral display. And you would have to develop and cultivate techniques specific to that. And this is not just true of sound art, and I'm extending sound art to include composition, sound design, soundtrack work, everything that's in the field of audible sound, but to artistic representations of all the five senses, as I've talked about in previous episodes. Not merely sound, but sight, smell, taste, and touch. There is artisanship of every sense perception, right? This is work. This is what work is. We take our skills and we take our sets and we develop them with diligence in such a way that they can benefit all of humanity. We present the fruitional development of our skills to the world in the hopes that it will be responded to positively in the form of sustenance. We offer our love to the world in the hopes that the world will love us in return by sustaining us, by giving us food and shelter and support and the material that we need to continue to go on, whether that's in the form of money or whether that's in other like levels of interpersonal support, And I talked about in previous episodes how there are different levels of support, that, for example, teachers support art by interpreting it, right? And audiences support art by physically attending and maintaining focus. Patrons support art by making capital, by making monetary and physical resources available to artists so that artists can have access to the media that they need to realize their visions. And in some sense, the direct patronage of the someone who brings wealth, and commits significant resources of wealth. This is the most important. This is really a type of a co-creator of the artwork. I talked about that when we sort of analyzed the movie The Brutalist. So, getting back to Parable of the Sower, I think this novel is an immensely powerful, very simple, using very simple language, representation of what it means to develop a sacred attitude towards labor. And not, that's completely different from sort of this, I don't know, lefty labor unionist attitude of the dignity of labor. I mean, it's not simply saying that, workers need respect. Yes, workers need respect, that's true. But it's beyond that, all right? It's saying that it's not simply that it's this sort of unpleasant thing that we do to pay the rent, but it's actually a wonderful and great expression of who we are as human beings. And the Bible uses language going all the way back to Genesis, of the importance of labor. And and then in the Old Testament, there's constant references to working with the earth, and there's a vision in Old Testament prophets of sacred bioregionalism, and of the what Hesiod would call the works and days of hands. The amount of labor that it goes into making a arid or stony into bloom, to create an oasis. That goes back to Genesis 1, the idea of a garden of abundance, and that humans can be view their existence as sort of tending this garden which has been created, and which is viewed as sacred, viewed as by the Creator, in that sense, because it allows us to manifest our highest selves. So all of this is reiterated in the New Testament parables and told in the form of, but Jesus plays the role of a artist and literary critic. He tells a story. He creates a poetic, metaphorical structure, the parable of the sower, and then he interprets it, and then he explains as a teacher that that interpretation is essential, not simply literalist belief, but working with it. And so this is how we will read the first 7 chapters of Parable of the Sower. I'll get through as much of it as I can today, and I will continue. My goal is to bring us up into the present day timeline of the Parable of the Sower in 2025. Today is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. And so that is not the entire narrative of Parable of the Sower, but it is chapters 1 through 7. So we'll see how far we can get to this today. And as we're reading this, if you have a copy, please take it out and let's read it together. And as we're reading this, we're thinking about work. It's the portrait of the artist as a young worker, and she, by the end of the novel sequence, she's not just a young worker, but she is actually a visionary figure. So what Octavia Butler is creating is a kind of a mythical representation of the youth of a great prophet. Like, what would it have been like to have known, for example, biblical prophet like Isaiah at age 15? What would it have been like to have known any of the great prophets? These legendary figures, who in retrospect seem superhuman, right? But presenting it in a very, very human terms. And so that's that being said. Okay, let's just jump into it. So, Parable of the Sower. And so we can see that it begins in 2024. Okay. So we'll try to get from events of 2024 into the events of 2025. So, preface, 2024. Each section begins with an epigraph taken from the writings of the protagonist of Lauren Olamina. And so the epigraph to 2024 is on the theme of prodigy. So, prodigy is, at its essence, adaptability and persistent positive obsession. Without persistence, what remains is an enthusiasm of the moment. Without adaptability, what remains may be channeled into destructive fanaticism. Without positive obsession, there is nothing at all. And the citation for that epigraph is Earth Seed, The Books of the Living by Lauren Oya Olamina. And that is a sort of a direct statement by the 15-year-old protagonist of the novel, saying what it is, the essence of work, of productive work: adaptability, persistent, positive obsession. This is what we must bring to our work in order to bring it to fruition, just as is referenced in the How to Get a Good Result, the parable of the sower in the Bible. And the chapters usually begin with an epigraph taken from the visionary writings of the protagonist, Lauren Olamina. So chapter 1 begins with a verse. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. And the only lasting truth is change. God is change. Earthseed, The Books of the Living, Saturday, July 20th, 2024. I had my recurring dream last night. I guess I should have expected it. It comes to me when I struggle, when I twist on my own personal hook and try to pretend that nothing unusual is happening. It comes to me when I try to be my father's daughter. Today is our birthday, my 15th and my father's 55th. Tomorrow, I'll try to please him and the community and God. So last night, I dreamed a reminder that it's all a lie. I think I need to write about the dream because this particular lie bothers me so much. I'm learning to fly, to levitate myself. No one is teaching me. I'm just learning on my own, little by little, dream lesson by dream lesson. Not a very subtle image, but a persistent one. I've had many lessons, and I'm better at flying than I used to be. I trust my ability more now, but I'm still afraid. I can't quite control my directions yet. I lean forward toward the doorway. It's a doorway like the one between my room and the hall. It seems to be a long way from me, but I lean toward it. Holding my body stiff and tense, I let go of whatever I'm grasping, whatever has kept me from rising or falling so far. And I lean into the air, straining upward, not moving upward, but not quite falling down either. Then I do begin to move, as though to slide on the air, drifting a few feet above the floor, caught between terror and joy. I drift toward the doorway. Cool, pale light glows from it. Then I slide a little to the right, and a little more. I can see that I'm going to miss the door and hit the wall beside it, but I can't stop or turn. I drift away from the door, away from the cool glow, into another light. The wall before me is burning. Fire has sprung from nowhere, has eaten in through the wall, has begun to reach toward me, reach for me. The fire spreads. I drift into it. It blazes up around me. I thrash and scramble and try to swim back out of it, grabbing handfuls of air and fire, kicking, burning. Darkness. Perhaps I awake a little. I do sometimes when the fire swallows me. That's bad. When I wake up all the way, I can't get back to sleep. I try, but I've never been able to. This time, I don't wake up all the way. I fade into the second part of the dream, the part that's ordinary and real, the part that did happen years ago when I was little, though at the time it didn't seem to matter. Darkness. Darkness brightening. Stars. Stars casting their cool, pale, glinting light. We couldn't see so many stars when I was little, my stepmother says to me. She speaks in Spanish, her own first language. She stands still and small, looking up at the broad sweep of the Milky Way. She and I have gone out after dark to take the washing down from the clothesline. The day has been hot, as usual, and we both like the cool darkness of the early night. There's no moon, but we can see very well. The sky is full of stars. The neighborhood wall is a massive looming presence nearby. I see it as a crouching animal, perhaps about to spring, more threatening than protective. But my stepmother is there, and she isn't afraid. I stay close to her. I am 7 years old. I look up at the stars and the deep, black sky. Why couldn't you see the stars? I ask her. Everyone can see them. I speak in Spanish too, as she's taught me. It's an intimacy somehow. City lights, she says. Lights, progress, growth, all those things we're too hot and too poor to bother with anymore. She pauses. When I was your age, my mother told me that the stars, the few stars we could see, were windows into heaven, windows for God to look through to keep an eye on us. I believed her for almost a year. My stepmother hands me an armload of my youngest brother's diapers. I take them, walk back toward the house, where she has left her big wicker laundry basket, and pile the diapers atop the rest of the clothes. The basket is full. I look to see that my stepmother is not watching me, and let myself fall backward into the soft mound of stiff, clean clothes. For a moment, the fall is like floating. I lie there, looking up at the stars. I pick out some of the constellations and name the stars that make them up. I've learned them from an astronomy book that belonged to my father's mother. I see the sudden light streak of a meteor flashing westward across the sky. I stare after it, hoping to see another. Then my stepmother calls me, and I go back to her. There are city lights now, I say to her. They don't hide the stars. She shakes her head. There aren't anywhere near as many as there were. Kids today have no idea what a blaze of light cities used to be, and not that long ago. I'd rather have the stars, I say. The stars are free. She shrugs. I'd rather have the city lights back myself, the sooner the better. But we can afford the stars. Chapter 2. The epigraph for Chapter 2 is a gift of God may sear unready fingers. It's from Earthseed, the Books of the Living. And again, Earthseed, the Books of the Living, this is the prophetic religious book or text which is eventually written by the older protagonist, Lauren Olamina. So now the timeline moves. We're still in 2024, but it takes place the following day. These are correct calendar's days. We are now in Sunday, July 21st, 2024. So last July, 9 months ago. Okay. Sunday, July 21st, 2024. At least 3 years ago, my father's God stopped being my God. His church stopped being my church. And yet, today, because I'm a coward, I let myself be initiated into that church. I let my father baptize me in all three names of that God who isn't mine anymore. My God has another name. We got up early this morning because we had to go across town to church. Most Sundays, Dad holds church services in our front rooms. He's a Baptist minister, and even though not all of the people who live within our neighborhood walls are Baptists, those who feel the need to go to church are glad to come to us. That way, they don't have to risk going outside where things are so dangerous and crazy. It's bad enough that some people, my father for one, have to go out to work at least once a week. None of us goes out to school anymore. Adults get nervous about kids going outside. But today was special, for today my father made arrangements with another minister, a friend of his, who still had a real church building with a real baptistry. Dad once had a church just a few blocks outside our wall. He began it before there were so many walls. But after it had been slept in by the homeless, robbed, and vandalized several times, someone poured gasoline in and around and burned it down. 7 of the homeless people sleeping inside on that last night burned with it. But somehow Dad's friend Reverend Robinson has managed to keep his church from being destroyed. We rode our bikes to it this morning. Me, 2 of my brothers, 4 other neighborhood kids who were ready to be baptized, plus my father and some other neighborhood adults riding shotgun. All the adults were armed. That's the rule. Go out in a bunch and go armed. The alternative was to be baptized in the bathtub at home. That would have been cheaper and safer and fine with me. I said so, but no one paid attention to me. To the adults, going outside to a real church was like stepping back into the good old days when there were churches all over the place, and too many lights, and gasoline was for fueling cars and trucks instead of for torching things. They never miss a chance to relive the good old days or to tell kids how great it's going to be when the country gets back on its feet and the good times come back. Yeah. To us kids, most of us, the trip was just an adventure, an excuse to go outside the wall. We would be baptized out of duty or as a kind of insurance, but most of us aren't that much concerned with religion. I am, but then I have a different religion. Why take chances, Sylvia Dunn said to me a few days ago. Maybe there's something to all this religion stuff. Her parents thought there was, so she was with us. My brother Keith, who was also with us, didn't share any of my beliefs. He just didn't care. Dad wanted him to be baptized, so what the hell? There wasn't much that Keith did care about. He liked to hang out with his friends and pretend to be grown up, dodge work and dodge school, and Dodge Church. He's only 12, the oldest of my 3 brothers. I don't like him much, but he's my stepmother's favorite. 3 smart sons and 1 dumb one, and it's the dumb one she loves best. Keith looked around more than anyone as we rode. His ambition, if you could call it that, is to get out of the neighborhood and go to Los Angeles. He's never too clear about what he'll do there. He just wants to go to the big city and make money. According to my father, the big city is a carcass covered with too many maggots. I think he's right, though not all the maggots are in L.A. They're here, too. But maggots tend not to be early morning types. We rode past people stretched out, sleeping on the sidewalks, and a few just waking up, and they paid no attention to us. I saw at least 3 people who weren't going to wake up again ever. One of them was headless. I caught myself looking around for the head. After that, I tried not to look around at all. A woman, young, naked, and filthy, stumbled along past us. I got a look at her slack expression and realized that she was dazed or drunk or something. Maybe she had been raped so much that she was crazy. I'd heard stories of that happening. Or maybe she was just high on drugs. The boys in our group almost fell off their bikes staring at her. What wonderful religious thoughts they would be having for a while. The naked woman never looked at us. I glanced back after we'd passed her and saw that she had settled down in the weeds against someone else's neighborhood wall. A lot of our ride was along one neighborhood wall after another. Some a block long, some 2 blocks, some 5. Up toward the hills, there were walled estates, one big house and a lot of shacky little dependencies where the servants lived. We didn't pass anything like that today. In fact, we passed a couple of neighborhoods so poor that their walls were made up of unmortared rocks, chunks of concrete, and trash. Then there were the pitiful, unwalled residential areas. A lot of the houses were trashed, burned, vandalized, infested with drunks or druggies, or squatted in by homeless families with their filthy, gaunt, half-naked children. Their kids were wide awake and watching us this morning. I feel sorry for the little ones, but the ones my age and older make me nervous. We ride down the middle of the cracked street, and the kids come out and stand along the curb to stare at us. They just stand and stare. I think if there were only 1 or 2 of us, or if they couldn't see our guns, they might try to pull us down and steal our bikes, our clothes, our shoes, whatever. Then what? Rape? Murder? We could wind up like that naked woman, stumbling along, dazed, maybe hurt, sure to attract dangerous attention unless she could steal some clothing. I wish we could have given her something. My stepmother says she and my father stopped to help an injured woman once, and the guys who had injured her jumped out from behind a wall and almost killed them. We're in Robledo, 20 miles from Los Angeles, and according to Dad, once a rich, green, unwalled little city that he had been eager to abandon when he was a young man. Like Keith, he had wanted to escape the dullness of Robledo for big city excitement. L.A. was better then, less lethal. He lived there for 21 years. Then, in 2010, his parents were murdered and he inherited their house. Whoever killed them had robbed the house and smashed up the furniture, but they didn't torch anything. There was no neighborhood wall back then. Crazy to live without a wall to protect you. Even in Robledo, most of the street poor, squatters, winos, junkies, homeless people in general, are dangerous. They're desperate or crazy or both. That's enough to make anyone dangerous. Worse for me. they often have things wrong with them. They cut off each other's ears, arms, legs. They carry untreated diseases and festering wounds. They have no money to spend on water to wash with, so even the unwounded have sores. They don't get enough to eat, so they're malnourished. Or they eat bad food and poison themselves. As I rode, I tried not to look around at them, but I couldn't help seeing, collecting, some of their general misery. I can take a lot of pain without falling apart. I've had to learn to do that, but it was hard today to keep pedaling and keep up with the others just when about everyone I saw made me feel worse and worse. My father glanced back at me every now and then. He tells me, "You can beat this thing. You don't have to give in to it." He has always pretended, or perhaps believed, that my hyper-empathy syndrome was something I could shake off and forget about. The sharing isn't real after all. It isn't some magic or ESP that allows me to share the pain or the pleasure of other people. It's delusional. Even I admit that. My brother Keith used to pretend to be hurt just to trick me into sharing his supposed pain. Once he used red ink as fake blood to make me bleed. I was 11 then, and I still bled through the skin when I saw someone else bleeding. I couldn't help doing it, and I always worried that it would give me away to people outside the family. I haven't shared bleeding with anyone since I was 12 and got my first period. What a relief that was. I just wish all the rest of it had gone away too. Keith only tricked me into bleeding that once, and I beat the hell out of him for it. I didn't fight much when I was little because it hurt me so. I felt every blow that I struck, just as though I'd hit myself. So when I did decide that I had to fight, I set out to hurt the other kid more than kids usually hurt one another. I broke Michael Talcott's arm and Ruben Quintanilla's nose. I knocked out 4 of Sylvia Dunn's teeth. They all earned what I did to them 2 or 3 times over. I got punished every time, and I resented it. It was double punishment after all, and my father and stepmother knew it. But knowing didn't stop them. I think they did it to satisfy the other kids' parents. But when I beat up Keith, I knew that Corey or Dad or both of them would punish me for it. My poor little brother, after all. So I had to see that my poor little brother paid in advance. What I did to him had to be worthwhile in spite of what they would do to me. It was. We both got it later from Dad, me for hurting a younger kid and Keith for risking putting family business into the street. Dad is big on privacy and family business. There's a whole range of things we never even hint about outside the family. First among these is anything about my mother, my hyper-empathy, and how the two are connected. To my father, the whole business is shameful. He's a preacher and a professor and a dean. A first wife who was a drug addict and a daughter who is drug damaged is not something he wants to boast about. Lucky for me. Being the most vulnerable person I know is damn sure not something I want to boast about. I can't do a thing about my hyperempathy, no matter what Dad thinks or wants or wishes. I feel that I see others feeling or what I believe they feel. Hyperempathy is what the doctors call an organic delusional syndrome. Big shit. It hurts. That's all I know. Thanks to Paris Cetico, the small pill, the Einstein powder, the particular drug my mother chose to abuse before my birth killed her, I'm crazy. I get a lot of grief that doesn't belong to me, and that isn't real, but it hurts. I'm supposed to share pleasure and pain, but there isn't much pleasure around these days. About the only pleasure I found that I enjoy sharing is sex. I get the guy's good feeling and my own. I almost wish I didn't. I live in a tiny, walled fishbowl cul-de-sac community, and I'm the preacher's daughter. There's a real limit to what I can do as far as sex goes. Anyway, my neurotransmitters are scrambled, and they're going to stay scrambled. I can do okay as long as other people don't know about me. Inside our neighborhood walls, I do fine. Our rides today, though, were hell. Going and coming, they were all the worst things I've ever felt. Shadows and ghosts, twists and jabs of unexpected pain. If I don't look too long at old injuries, they don't hurt me too much. There was a naked little boy whose skin was a mass of big red sores, a man with a huge scab over the stump where his right hand used to be, a little girl, naked, maybe 7 years old, with blood running down her bare thighs, a woman with a swollen, bloody, beaten face. I must have seemed jumpy. I glanced around like a bird, not letting my gaze rest on anyone longer than it took me to see that they weren't coming in my direction or aiming anything at me. Dad may have read something of what I was feeling in my expression. I try not to let my face show anything, but he's good at reading me. Sometimes people say I look grim or angry. Better to have them think that than know the truth. Better to have them think anything than let them know just how easy it is to hurt me. Dad had insisted on fresh, clean, potable water for the baptism. He couldn't afford it, of course. Who could? That was the other reason for the 4 extra kids. Sylvia Dunn, Hector Quintanilla, Curtis Talcott, and Drew Balter, along with my brothers Keith and Marcus. The other kids' parents had helped with costs. They thought a proper baptism was important enough to spend some money and take some risks. I was the oldest by about 2 months. Curtis was next. As much as I hated being there, I hated even more that Curtis was there. I care about him more than I want to. I care what he thinks of me. I worry that I'll fall apart in public someday and he'll see. But not today. By the time we reached the fortress church, my jaw muscles hurt from clenching and unclenching my teeth, and overall I was exhausted. There were only 5 or 6 dozen people at the service, enough to fill up our front rooms at home and look like a big crowd. At the church, though, with its surrounding wall and its security bars and laser wire and its huge hollowness inside, and its armed guards, the crowd seemed a tiny scattering of people. That was all right. The last thing I wanted was a big audience to maybe trip me up with pain. The baptism went just as planned. They sent us kids off to the bathrooms, men's, women's. Please do not put paper of any kind into toilets. Water for washing in bucket at left. To undress and put on white gowns. When we were ready, Curtis's father took us to an anteroom where we could hear the preaching from the first chapter of St. John and the second chapter of the Acts, and wait our turns. My turn came last. I assumed that was my father's idea. First the neighbor kids, then my brothers, then me. For reasons that don't make a lot of sense to me, Dad thinks I need more humility. I think my particular biological humility or humiliation is more than enough. What the hell? Someone had to be last. I just wish I could have been courageous enough to skip the thing altogether. So, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Catholics get this stuff over with when they're babies. I wish Baptists did. I almost wish I could believe it was important, the way a lot of people seem to, the way my father seems to. Failing that, I wish I didn't care. But I do. The idea of God is much on my mind these days. I've been paying attention to what other people believe, whether they believe, and if so, what kind of God they believe in. Keith says God is just the adult's way of trying to scare you into doing what they want. He doesn't say that around Dad, but he says it. He believes in what he sees, and no matter what's in front of him, he doesn't see much. I suppose Dad would say that about me if he knew what I believe. Maybe he'd be right, but it wouldn't stop me from seeing what I see. A lot of people seem to believe in a big daddy God or a big cop God or a big king God. They believe in a kind of super person. A few believe God is another word for nature. And nature turns out to mean just about anything they happen not to understand or feel in control of. Some say God is a spirit, a force, an ultimate reality. Ask 7 people what all of that means, and you'll get 7 different answers. So what is God? Just another name for whatever makes you feel special and protected? There's a big early season storm blowing itself out in the Gulf of Mexico. It's bounced around the Gulf, killing people from Florida to Texas and down into Mexico. There are over 700 known dead so far. 1 hurricane. And how many people has it hurt? How many are going to starve later because of destroyed crops? That's nature. Is it God? Most of the dead are the street poor, who have nowhere to go, and who don't hear the warnings until it's too late for their feet to take them to safety. Where's safety for them anyway? Is it a sin against God to be poor? We're almost poor ourselves. There are fewer and fewer jobs among us, more of us being born, more kids growing up with nothing to look forward to. One way or another, we'll all be poor someday. The adults say things will get better, but they never have. How will God, my Father's God, behave toward us when we're poor? Is there a God? If there is, does he, she, it care about us? Deists like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson believed God was something that made us, then left us on our own. Misguided, Dad said when I asked him about deists. They should have had more faith in what their Bibles told them. I wonder if the people on the Gulf Coast still have faith. People have had faith through horrible disasters before. I read a lot about that kind of thing. I read a lot, period. My favorite book of the Bible is Job. I think it says more about my father's God in particular, and gods in general, than anything else I've ever read. In the book of Job, God says he made everything, and he knows everything, so no one has any right to question what he does with any of it. Okay, that works. That Old Testament God doesn't violate the way things are now. But that God sounds a lot like Zeus, a super powerful man playing with his toys the way my youngest brother plays with toy soldiers. Bang, bang! 7 toys fall dead. If they're yours, you make the rules. Who cares what the toys think? Wipe out a toy's family, then give it a brand new family. Toy children, like Job's children, are interchangeable. Maybe God is kind of a big kid playing with his toys. If he is, what difference does it make if 700 people get killed in a hurricane? Or if 7 kids go to church and get dipped in a big tank of expensive water? But what if all that is wrong? What if God is something else altogether? Chapter 3, and I think we'll end in chapter 3 today, begins with her epigraph, and we're still in the timeline of July, summer of 2024, so last summer. So the epigraph is, we do not worship God, we perceive and attend God, we learn from God. With forethought and work, we shape God. In the end, we yield to God. We adapt and endure, for we are earth seed, and God is change. Earth seed, the books of the living. Tuesday, July 30th, 2024. One of the astronauts on the latest Mars mission has been killed. Something went wrong with her protective suit, and the rest of her team couldn't get her back to the shelter in time to save her. People here in the neighborhood are saying she had no business going to Mars anyway. All that money wasted on another crazy space trip when so many people here on Earth can't afford water, food, or shelter. The cost of water has gone up again. And I heard on the news today that more water peddlers are being killed. Peddlers sell water to squatters and the street poor, and to people who've managed to hold on to their homes, but not to pay their utility bills. Peddlers are being found with their throats cut and their money and their hand trucks stolen. Dad says water now costs several times as much as gasoline. But except for arsonists and the rich, most people have given up buying gasoline. No one I know uses a gas-powered car, truck, or cycle. Vehicles like that are rusting in driveways and being cannibalized for metal and plastic. It's a lot harder to give up water. Fashion helps. You're supposed to be dirty now. If you're clean, you make a target of yourself. People think you're showing off, trying to be better than they are. Among the younger kids, being clean is a great way to start a fight. Corey won't let us stay dirty here in the neighborhood, but we all have filthy clothes to wear outside the walls. Even inside, my brothers throw dirt on themselves as soon as they get away from the house. It's better than getting beaten up all the time. Tonight, the last big window wall television in the neighborhood went dark for good. We saw the dead astronaut with all of red rocky Mars around her. We saw a dust-dry reservoir and 3 dead water peddlers with their dirty blue armbands and their heads cut halfway off. And we saw whole blocks of boarded-up buildings burning in Los Angeles. And of course, no one would waste water trying to put such fires out. Then the window went dark. The sound had flickered up and down for months, but the picture was always as promised, like looking through a vast open window. The Yanis family made a business of having people in to look through their window. Dad says that kind of unlicensed business isn't legal, but he let us go to watch sometimes because he didn't see any harm in it, and it helped the Giannis's. A lot of small businesses are illegal even though they don't hurt anyone, and they keep a household or two alive. The Giannis window is about as old as I am. It covers the long west wall of their living room. They must have had plenty of money back when they bought it. For the past couple of years, though, they've been charging admission, only letting in people from the neighborhood, and selling fruit juice, acorn bread, or walnuts. Whatever they had too much of in their garden, they found a way to sell. They showed movies from their library, and let us watch news and whatever else was broadcast. They couldn't afford to subscribe to any of the new multi-sensory stuff, and their old window couldn't have received most of it anyway. They have no reality vests, no touch rings, and no headsets. Their setup was just a plain, thin-screened window. All we have left now are 3 small, ancient, murky little TV sets scattered around the neighborhood, a couple of computers used for work, and radios. Every household still has at least one working radio. A lot of our everyday news is from radio. I wonder what Mrs. Giannis will do now. Her 2 sisters have moved in with her, and they're working, so maybe it will all be all right. One is a pharmacist, and the other is a nurse. They don't earn much, but Mrs. Giannis owns the house free and clear. It was her parents' house. All 3 sisters are widows, and between them they have 12 kids, all younger than I am. 2 years ago, Mr. Giannis, a dentist, was killed while riding his electric cycle home from the walled guarded clinic where he worked. Mrs. Giannis says he was caught in a crossfire, hit from 2 directions, then shot once more at close range. His bike was stolen. The police investigated, collected their fee, and couldn't find a thing. People get killed like that all the time. Unless it happens in front of a police station, there are never any witnesses. Saturday, August 3rd, 2024. The dead astronaut is going to be brought back to Earth. She wanted to be buried on Mars. She said that when she realized she was dying. She said Mars was the one thing she had wanted all her life, and now she would be part of it forever. But the Secretary of Astronautics says no. He says her body might be a contaminant. Idiot. Can he believe that any microorganism living in or on her body would have a prayer of surviving and going native in that cold, thin, lethal ghost of an atmosphere? Maybe he can. Secretaries of Astronautics don't have to know much about science. They have to know about politics. Theirs is the youngest cabinet department, and it's already fighting for its life. Christopher Morpeth Donner, one of the men running for president this year, has promised to abolish it if he's elected. My father agrees with Donner. Bread and circuses, my father says when there's space news on the radio. Politicians and big corporations get the bread, and we get the circuses. Space could be our future, I say. I believe that. As far as I'm concerned, space exploration and colonization are among the few things left over from the last century that can help us more than they hurt us. It's hard to get anyone to see that, though, when there's so much suffering going on just outside our walls. Dad just looks at me and shakes his head. You don't understand, he says. You don't have any idea what a criminal waste of time and money that so-called space program is. He's going to vote for Donner. He's the only person I know who's going to vote at all. Most people have given up on politicians. After all, politicians have been promising to return to us the glory, the wealth, and order of the 20th century ever since I can remember. That's what the space program is about these days, at least for politicians. Hey, we can run a space station, a station on the moon, and soon a colony on Mars. That proves we're still a great, forward-looking, powerful nation, right? Yeah. Well, we're barely a nation at all anymore, but I'm glad we're still in space. We have to be going someplace other than down the toilet. And I'm sorry that astronaut will be brought back from her own chosen heaven. Her name was Alicia Catalina Godinez Leal. She was a chemist. I intend to remember her. I think she can be a kind of model for me. She spent her life heading for Mars, preparing herself, becoming an astronaut, getting on a Mars crew, going to Mars, beginning to figure out how to terraform Mars, beginning to create sheltered places where people can live and work now. Mars is a rock, cold, empty, almost airless, dead. Yet it's heaven in a way. We can see it in the night sky, a whole other world, but too nearby, too close within the reach of people who've made such a hell of life here on Earth. I think I'm going to draw the line here for this session. We're halfway through chapter 3 of Parable of the Sower. We've gotten up to page 21. We've gotten through August 3rd of 2024. And our next episode will continue with the diary entry for Monday, August 12th of 2024. And we'll continue with commentary. I'm reading Parable of the Sower in terms of the idea of the sacredness of work. I'm not commenting on the political content, and there's certainly a lot of narrative emphasis that is that I do not share interest. I have no interest in colonizing Mars and outer space and so on and so forth. But I really am very moved by Octavia Butler's representation of, from the perspective of a young person, of finding one's calling and work in life, and the sacredness of that, and the obstacles that have to be overcome to manifest that, and how that relates to the idea of the parable of the sower in the Bible. So until next time, this has been Art is the Church of God the Creator. And if you believe it, say it. This is Greg Muna, aka Master Moo. So let's say it together until we meet next time. Art is the Church of God the Creator.